On July 23rd, 1972, a satellite left Earth's atmosphere and began doing something no human ever could, watching the entire planet all at once without stopping. For 50 years, it has been circling overhead, photographing the same forests, the same rivers, the same stretches of land every 16 days without fail. And what it found in the Amazon should have changed everything, because hidden inside decades of satellite imagery was a record, precise, time-stamped, and irrefutable, of one of the largest environmental transformations in human history. Scientists saw it, researchers documented it, the data was published, and for a long time the world looked the other way. This is the story of what that satellite actually captured over the Amazon. The scale of the destruction, the political battles over the evidence, and the question that still doesn't have an answer. When the proof is undeniable, why is the forest still disappearing? On July 23rd, 1972, the United States launched the first Landsat satellite into orbit. It wasn't built for military surveillance. It wasn't tracking weather. It had one purpose: to photograph Earth's land surface, repeatedly, systematically, and permanently. Every 16 days, it passed over the same locations. Every pass produced new images, and over time, those images stacked into something extraordinary. A continuous visual record of how the planet's surface was changing, year after year, decade after decade. The Amazon was always in the frame. At 5.5 million square kilometers, it is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth. It spans 9 countries. It contains more species of plants, insects, and freshwater fish than any other ecosystem on the planet. And for most of human history, the interior of it was almost completely inaccessible, unknown even to the governments that claimed ownership over it. The satellite changed that, but in the early years, the data came slowly. Images were printed onto physical photographs, shipped to research institutions, and analyzed by hand. Scientists would lay photos side by side, comparing one year to the next, marking changes with pencils and rulers. It was painstaking work. The Amazon is roughly the size of the contiguous United States. Monitoring it manually, image by image, meant that by the time a finding was published, the destruction it documented was often years old. The scale of the problem was always outrunning the speed of the analysis. And yet, even through that slow and imperfect process, a pattern was emerging. The forest was shrinking, not in one place, not in one country, but across the entire basin. Year after year, the green was retreating and the brown was advancing. The satellite was recording everything. The world just didn't have a way to see it all at once. Not yet. For 36 years, the Landsat archive sat behind a paywall. Individual images cost up to $600 each. Research institutions could afford them. Independent scientists, smaller universities, and developing nations largely could not. The data existed, but access to it was rationed by price. In 2008, the United States Geological Survey made a decision that quietly changed the course of environmental science. Every image ever captured by Landsat, millions of them, stretching back to 1972, was made freely available online. No cost, no application, no restrictions. The response from the scientific community was immediate. Researchers who had spent careers analyzing dozens of images at a time now had access to millions. Software tools were built to process them at scale. Algorithms were written to detect changes in vegetation automatically, scanning decades of imagery in hours rather than years. And for the first time, scientists could see the whole planet at once. What they found in the Amazon was staggering, but it wasn't just the scale of the destruction in Brazil, it was the geography of it. Deforestation wasn't contained within a single border. It was happening simultaneously across Colombia, Peru, Paraguay, and Bolivia, advancing on multiple fronts in multiple countries at the same time. And it was accelerating. Year after year, the rate of loss was climbing. Not fluctuating, climbing. The open data also revealed something more unsettling than the numbers themselves. The patterns of deforestation across the basin weren't random. They followed roads, they followed rivers. They appeared in clusters, in coordinated shapes, in areas that had been politically contested or economically targeted. The satellite hadn't just recorded where the forest was disappearing, it had recorded how. And the how told a story that went far beyond accident or negligence. The Amazon wasn't being lost, it was being taken, systematically, and the evidence had been accumulating in orbit for decades. The numbers, when finally processed at scale, were difficult to comprehend. Since 1978, an estimated 750,000 square kilometers of Amazon rainforest have been destroyed. That is an area larger than Chile. It is gone, cleared, burned, or degraded beyond recovery within a single human lifetime. But the raw total wasn't the most alarming part of what the satellite data revealed. It was the shape of the destruction. From space, the pattern was unmistakable. A crescent of cleared land stretching from the northeast of Brazil down through Mato Grosso and into Rondônia, advancing steadily into intact forest. Researchers called it the arc of deforestation. And unlike natural processes, which tend to be irregular and dispersed, this arc had edges. Clean ones. The kind that only come from machinery and intent. The Landsat record allowed scientists to do something that had never been possible before. Correlate the timing of deforestation with specific political and economic events. When commodity prices for soy spiked on global markets, the satellite data showed corresponding surges in clearing within weeks. When new roads were approved and construction began, deforestation followed the route before the asphalt was even laid. When enforcement agencies had their budgets cut, illegal clearing accelerated almost immediately in the regions they had been monitoring. The satellite was functioning as an unintentional audit trail. It wasn't just measuring how much forest was lost. It was documenting the economic logic behind each wave of destruction, connecting decisions made in boardrooms and government ministries to the specific coordinates where trees fell. This was no longer just an environmental data set. It was evidence of what was driving the destruction, when it happened, and where the pressure was being applied. The Amazon wasn't disappearing randomly. It was disappearing predictably. And that predictability pointed directly at a system, one that had been operating, largely undisturbed, for decades. Brazil didn't ignore the satellite data. It built an entire monitoring system around it. In 1988, the Brazilian government launched PRODES, the Program for Deforestation Monitoring in the Brazilian Amazon. It used Landsat imagery as its primary data source, processing images annually to calculate official deforestation rates across the entire basin. On paper, it was one of the most sophisticated national environmental monitoring systems in the world. No other country with a major tropical forest had built anything comparable. And for a period, it worked. The numbers PRODES produced were taken seriously by international bodies, foreign governments, and environmental organizations. They became the official record. The figures cited in treaties, in funding agreements, in United Nations reports. But the system had a structural problem that was difficult to separate from the institution running it. The same government responsible for protecting the Amazon was also the government publishing the data that measured how well it was being protected. PRODES sat within Brazil's own scientific and administrative infrastructure. Its findings informed policy, but its findings could also be politically inconvenient. There was also a technical limitation. PRODES was designed to detect large-scale clearing, the kind visible from standard Landsat resolution. A farmer clearing 500 hectares in a single operation would appear in the data. But the system was less equipped to capture incremental degradation, selective logging that removed the most valuable trees while leaving the canopy partially intact, fires that burned through the understory without eliminating the overstory, edge effects from roads that slowly dried out and fragmented surrounding forest. These processes didn't register as deforestation in official figures, but they were killing the forest anyway. The PRODES numbers were real. They were also incomplete. And outside Brazil, independent researchers with access to the same Landsat archive were beginning to run their own analysis. What they found didn't always match what the government was reporting. The same data, different conclusions. That was the uncomfortable reality that emerged when independent researchers began applying their own tools to the publicly available Landsat archive. They weren't working from different images. They were looking at the same pixels, the same timestamps, the same coordinates as Brazil's official monitoring system. But they were asking different questions. PRODES measured deforestation, the complete removal of forest cover. Independent scientists began measuring degradation, the slow, yet partial destruction of a forest that still looks intact from a distance, but is losing its ecological function from the inside. A forest can appear green on a satellite image and simultaneously be dying. Selective logging removes the largest, most commercially valuable trees. Leaving the canopy fragmented and the forest floor exposed to sunlight, it was never designed to receive. Fire burns through the understory, killing seedlings and young trees while leaving older ones temporarily standing. Roads cut through intact areas, drying out the surrounding vegetation and pushing the forest toward a threshold where it can no longer sustain its own rainfall cycle. None of this registered as deforestation in official figures. All of it was visible in the data to researchers who knew how to look. Studies published by independent institutions found that degraded forest in the Amazon could be adding as much additional carbon to the atmosphere as officially recorded deforestation, effectively doubling the climate impact that government statistics were reporting. The findings created friction. Brazil's government pushed back, defending the integrity of PRODES and questioning the methodology of outside researchers. The scientific disagreement was genuine in some respects, but it also served a political function. As long as the numbers were contested, decisive action could be deferred. Meanwhile, the satellite kept recording. It didn't take sides in the methodological debate. It simply continued documenting what was happening on the ground, impartially, repeatedly, from 705 kilometers above the argument. The numbers shifted in 2019. Now visibly, measurably, undeniably. Independent analysis of Landsat data, cross-referenced with Brazil's own Deter alert system and complementary satellite platforms, showed a statistically significant surge in deforestation across the Amazon basin. The increase wasn't marginal. In some regions, clearing rates more than doubled compared to the same period 2 years earlier. And then came August. In a single month, satellite systems detected more than 30,000 individual fire events across the Amazon. The images were striking enough that they circulated globally within days. Vast plumes of smoke visible from space, fires burning simultaneously across an area that spanned multiple states and multiple countries. The scale of it was impossible to attribute to accident or drought alone. The data told a more specific story. When researchers mapped the fire locations against land classification records, a pattern emerged that was difficult to explain by natural causes. A disproportionate number of fires were burning inside protected areas and indigenous territories, the regions that were legally off-limits to clearing. In some areas, the timing clustered around a single date, consistent with what local journalists in Pará had already begun reporting. A coordinated effort among landowners and land grabbers to clear and burn simultaneously, betting that the sheer volume of fires would overwhelm enforcement capacity. The satellite confirmed it. Brazil's government disputed the international figures and questioned the motives of foreign researchers and environmental organizations. But the archive was public. The methodology was published. Other governments, international institutions, and journalists could run the same analysis independently and did. For the first time in history, a country's environmental record could be fact-checked from orbit in near real time by anyone with an internet connection and the right software. The forest was still burning, but now the burning was documented, dated, and mapped down to the individual coordinate. Ignorance was no longer a credible defense. The Landsat satellite is still up there, still circling, still watching. Its archive now spans more than 50 years of continuous Earth observation, the longest unbroken record of human impact on the planet's surface ever assembled. Every clearing, every fire, every road cut through intact forest is in that record. timestamped, mapped, permanent. The Amazon story is written in that data. The destruction, the partial recoveries, the accelerations that followed political shifts, all of it documented in orbit waiting to be read. The satellite doesn't save forests, it only watches. What the data cannot do is make governments act. It cannot override economic incentives. It cannot replace political will. The evidence is clearer today than it has ever been. The tipping point is measurable. The science is not seriously disputed. The only question that remains has never been scientific. It has always been political. Thank you for watching. If you value stories like this and want to support more independent documentaries, consider subscribing to the channel. Continue the journey. Watch the next film and explore the story further.